Welcome to another episode of the Thunderstock Show, a collection of valuable brainstorms to enhance your life, liberty, pursuit of property. Today's special guest is Frank Gustafson. Frank is a former Marine, once Marine, always Marine, spent several decades in sales, leadership, now founder of Strategic Training Partners. He's a Sandler Training firm serving growth-minded business owners. Frank, I've already had a blast talking to you. How's it going? Love the background. And for those of you that are listening, I'm going to ask you a question about what's on your shelf. What's with the orange ping pong balls?
Brother, I appreciate the opportunity to be here. Thanks. So you're asking now what the heck these are?
What the heck are those orange ping pong balls?
So,
I have an idea.
So I'm kind of a visual guy. That's my sales pipeline. So the goal is, let's see if I can do this right. The goal is to get all of these ping pong balls from here over to here. So these are kind of in the pipeline. These are these are my suspects. And then these are the closed deals. So the goal is to get them there. And I'm an optimist. I've got 100 orange ping pong balls, and I also bought 100 green ones. Hey, I'm an optimist. What are you gonna do? It just keeps it in front of me, even though it's behind me. I'm on video a lot, and I see them all the time, and I'm like, I gotta keep prospecting. I gotta keep moving people from one side to the other.
I love the visual aspect of that because in today's day and age, we talked about how you can use AI to integrate and manage your pipeline for you. And there's all these smart dashboards that are data enriched and can tell you, your suspect's mother's maiden name almost, it feels like. But if you can't tangibly see it and it's not top of mind, like how useful is all that data if it's not causing action? And for you to drop 100 plus ping pong balls into 3 different buckets visually, I think that's something that people could take a lesson from.
Well, I believe in having good data. I believe in having good CRM and pipeline hygiene, but this kind of brings it home to me, having that ping pong ball there.
Totally. So, Frank, I want to talk about the journey. First thing is, when you were growing up, you're an 8-year-old kid. What were you into? Were you entrepreneurial? Were you selling lemonade? Were you one of those guys who's like, I don't really like school, I'm going to join the military? Like, how did you transition into the Marine Corps, and what was the motivation there?
So I hated school from first grade all the way through. I hated being in school. In first grade, I was out catching tickle bees. There's these, I don't know if you know what a tickle bee is. It's a bit, they don't sting you. And there's a time in the year where you get these tickle bees. And many times my first grade teacher had to come out into the playground and yell at me, it's time to start school, get in here. But I just, I didn't really like the whole structure of school in the whole 9 yards. And probably just a lack of discipline, which kind of led me to the reason that I joined the Marine Corps years into my young life. But, entrepreneurial, probably, kind of came from an entrepreneurial family. My grandfather owned a number of businesses. He passed away before I was born. My dad was entrepreneurial. On my mom's side, there were some entrepreneurs. So, entrepreneurial spirit kind of runs deep with us. My brother owns a business as well now. And as far as sales goes, I never wanted to be in sales. I wanted nothing to do with sales. I got tricked in. But my first sales gig was selling wrapping paper door to door as a Boy Scout. And I hated it.
Yeah. People say that if you want to get better at sales or just talking to people, nothing beats door to door. Would you say it's true?
Dude, there's a couple of organizations that are out there that I have a tremendous amount of respect for. One is Southwestern Books, and they take college students and they drop them into an area that they are not familiar with, and and for the entire summer they're just door to door selling books, and their training is amazing. The other one is Cutco, which is less door to door, I think, but it's in the home selling. And both of those organizations bust out some real entrepreneurs and some real serious sellers. A lot of respect for those.
Talk about the door-to-door encyclopedia. Similar to you, my grandfather, entrepreneurial, father also entrepreneurial, but a career in sales. His first sales thing was door-to-door encyclopedias in college. So probably that same program. And he said that he goes, man, you get a portion of people that either won't answer or slam the door in your face, but then a couple that let you sit in your home and you just get to know them for an hour and then they end up buying. And according to him, that was one of the best training, to start the career, more than any of the college classes.
Yeah.
When you joined the Marines, what was your MOS? What were the things that you did, and what did you learn from the Marine Corps? I know one thing you mentioned was discipline.
Well, so I was I didn't have a lot of I didn't put my finger on it until after I dropped out of high school. So couple of weeks left in high school, and the counselor calls me and she says, "Hey, I just want to let you know you're not graduating." And I'm like, "What are you talking about?" And she's like, "You've got too many absences." And I guess in the early 80s, I don't know what it is now, but you had 17 absences, you weren't going to get credit for class. And she said, "So you're not going to graduate?" And there was like 2 weeks left before the end of school. And I said, "Okay, I appreciate you letting me know. Can I go?" And she's like, "Yeah." And she thought I meant, "Can I go back to class?" That's not what I meant. And I left. And end of the week, my dad walks in and he says, "Hey, how was school today?" And I said, same old, same old. And he said, "Well, they called and said you haven't been there all week." And I said, "Yeah, and I'm not going back." And he said, "Yeah, you are." "No, I'm not." We went through that whole thing for 10 minutes. And I said, "Look, if I'm not graduating, I'm not going to go waste the next 2 weeks. I've got 2 jobs. I'm working." And I didn't play in high school. I worked.
Mm.
So my dad said, "Hey, don't let the doorknob hit you where the good Lord cracked you. If you're not going to go to school, you're not living in this house." So 18 years old, I was out the door, lived in the back of my Volkswagen, lived under a buddy's table with he and his sister in a tiny little efficiency apartment. And then I got my own nasty little apartment, and I'm in there, and I've got a mattress, I've got a pan, I've got a bag of popcorn, and I've got a chair and a coffee table. And I probably had a toothbrush. And I'm thinking one day, I'm like, man, my goal in life always, as long as I can remember, was to be a millionaire by the time I was 30. And I'm sitting here thinking, man, the train that I'm on does not go through Millionaireville. What am I missing? What's going on? What do I need? And I'm like, I don't know how this 18-year-old stupid kid, I realized that I was missing discipline. I wasn't disciplined. And
But you
I'm
had
like,
two jobs.
well, yeah, but that was about supporting a car and a girlfriend and having fun. So I'm like, where in the world can you get disciplined? I remember seeing the Marine Corps silent drill team at the State Fair of Texas. I'm like, those cats are disciplined. I want to go do that. So I went and found a recruiter, and he said, "Cool, just bring me your high school transcript." And I'm like, we got a problem. And he said, "Well, I might be able to get you a waiver, but you're not going to be able to go active duty. You're going to have to go in the reserve." So, and once you go through boot camp and go through your school, you need to go back and either get your GED or get your high school diploma. So I joined the Marine Corps, and discipline really was something that I learned and I picked up there by hook or by crook. You have to kind of learn it, or you just don't
You get
make
smoked repeatedly.
Yeah, it was tough. So I spent 7 years in the reserves and loved every second of it. Love the Marine Corps. Love everything that I learned there. I cut my leadership teeth there, and it was an experience.
So how did that newfound skill set you learned of discipline through the Marine Corps then translate back when you're back on track towards Millionaireville?
That's a great question. And I actually I had a podcast 10, 12 years ago, 2013, 14. So I bet about 10 years ago, a little more, called Lead Like a Marine. And basically what I did was I interviewed folks that were coming out of the military and talked to them about what are some of the soft skills? What are some of the things that you learned in the military that you can't really translate onto a resume? And it was leadership traits, it was discipline, it was integrity, a lot of those things that I think that I picked up as a Marine, and as I was maturing through that whole process, that really kind of put me on a path to succeed in no matter what I did, sales, entrepreneurship, etc.
Yeah, I think that some people, one of the common misconceptions I know I had growing up is that you're either a salesperson or you're not. You're either born an extrovert that can talk to anybody or you're not. And then I didn't realize until much later that was BS, and that you have to, put the work in. It's a learned skill. And some of the greatest, what do I want to say, life of the party type people didn't have as much of success in sales as we got older because they didn't have the discipline. Maybe it came easy. So I think maybe that transition from the Marine Corps to sales, like you said, knocking on doors, selling the wallpaper, those jobs, it's like maybe you didn't get compensated as much as you wanted to on that path to Millionaireville, but you sure learned a heck of a lot, I'm sure.
Well, the interesting thing you said there, Ross, was you talked about the people that are life of the party that have the gift of gab, and you also talked about the discipline to do the things that need to be done. And those two people are not often the same person. They don't live in the same body. And people, early on, I said I was tricked into sales, and I kind of had that gift of gab, and I had that personality thing. I just didn't have. I had the art of it down. I didn't have the science of it down. And this guy's like, "Yeah, you're a natural, blah blah blah." And I'm like, okay, fine, I'll try it. And I loved it. And, back in the 80s, things were a little easier. We didn't even have voicemail back then, man. People answered their phones,
Oh,
you know?
man.
I mean, voicemail it was there, but it was like super expensive. And not a lot of people had it. We didn't have cell phones. We have fax machines. And it was a little easier to sell back then. Today, it takes so much more of a science and a process and a methodology, and I've come to learn that the hard way, honestly. So I think that those people who have the gift of gab that are good in front of people need to figure out how to apply the science to selling to really be successful.
Yeah, that's such an interesting thing, balancing the art and science, right? I think I make that analogy with marketing, but you bring it up with sales, and it's like, yeah, there's an art form where you have to be able to express yourself and be creative and think on your feet and have intuition. But then there's that, okay, what's the process? Like what's the formula? What's the math behind this? And I think the ping pong analogy behind you sort of is indicative of the science, right? Where it's like, look, let's make some assumptions on the stage. What if it's a 3-stage sales process? You need X amount of suspects to get Y amount of prospects to get Z amount of customers, right? So I don't want to get too much in the weeds on this idea, but my question for you now is, how do you use the art, right, to then teach the science? Because I think that's sort of part of what you do in some respects.
How do you use the art to teach the science? I think that, well, you can't. I had a mentor one time that said, you can't teach a pig to sing. All you do is irritate the pig, right? So think that one of the biggest issues in sales is, especially in sales training, is look, the fact of the matter is sales training doesn't work in and of itself. Think about all the one-day seminars you've been to, and all the the online classes that you've taken, all the different things that you've taken, that you've done, and then you haul off a week later, 2 weeks later, and you're back in the same rut. You're doing the same stuff. You've gotten sucked back into the buyer's process, and totally out of what you learned a week ago. However, regular, periodic, methodical, repeated weekly injection of sales methodologies, sales behaviors, attitudes, and techniques, over time, you get substantive change. And I think that that's where people who maybe have a little more of the art of sales, that have a desire to pick up that science of sales, can do it. The other side is the ones who are, if you're familiar with DISC, the high C's that are all into the details, and then maybe the high S's that are all about, just being nice and taking care of people, just kind of bringing both of those worlds together. I've seen a lot of people that are super, super data oriented, that are very factual oriented, that have become great salespeople because they buy into the methodology more so than I've seen the ones who have got the gift of gab really be able to truly follow a process.
The disc is an interesting one. So I score really high D and then relatively high I, and bottom of the barrel S and C. And I find, like what you said, is that sometimes I rely on my DNA or who I am too much. And unless there's a system or an outside force, like a coach, someone to hold me accountable, to create the process and to help me to learn from the process, learn it with me, it's really darn hard. But those detail oriented people, they love the process. So is that, you're nodding, saying you probably all can relate to the high D, high I. Can you explain what it's like on that side of the coin for those people?
Yeah, so I am definitely a high D, high I. I think that some of the things that we've seen here come along lately, like lately, like within the last 6 months, a year, 6 months, 2 months, a month, is AI bringing in the intelligence from a recording of a call on a Zoom call, been able to pull that information into your CRM. Because look, I'm not going to sit and plug all that stuff in CRM, but if I've got the ability to have an AI integration that can actually bring that into my CRM and have my process in the motion of what it is that I'm doing in the motion of my work, then I can see, and I can look up and I could say, okay, that opportunity is scored out as a 75. Why is it only a 75? What did I miss? Well, look at the red in your CRM. Click on the button. It opens up what you're missing. And if there's some mystification, you don't really understand that, click on the button. It brings up the training. It's all right there in the flow of work. In this day and age, I think that is something that is going to become even more ubiquitous because it'll become somewhat commoditized. The prices will come down. I mean, are you kidding me? Fathom, $20 a month. It'll record every single one of my calls and it'll unpack everything and tell me how I did and that's nothing. That's almost free.
I mean, it's what Netflix cost. You know what I mean? In this age of subscription, it's like, you could get way better at sales in a short period of time, or you could continue to watch one of your 6 different streaming platforms. Cut back one of the streaming platforms, you're good.
Yeah. And if you get really good at the behaviors, attitudes, and techniques of sales, you write your own ticket. Sky's the limit. You can watch all the Netflix you want. Retire.
I couldn't agree more. And it goes back to one of your things that you said when you're growing up, that you wanted to be a millionaire by 30. I find that by putting a timeline on something for goals, it helps to make like smart goals, right? But sometimes the growth isn't linear, really. Like in my own experience, like when I had a similar goal, right? It's like 1 year, I'm way down. And then 18 months later, I'm way up. And it's like, that wasn't a straight line. What do you see in terms of, like, from the lens of your experience, growth looks like, whether it's just sales or personal development growth or business? Like, how do you help people navigate the ups and downs? Because sales is a freaking roller coaster.
So I'll tell you, from a personal perspective, we've all been asked the question, hey, what's your mantra in life? What's your life verse? What's your thing? And I'm like, mine is, it sounds kind of cheesy, but really it's all good. And what that means to me is, like you said, I have had ebbs and flows, man. I've had years where I am on top of the mountain. I'm killing it. I achieved my 30-year-old goal by the time I was 31. And I've had it and I've lost it and I've gotten it back and I've lost it again. And there's been really difficult times in life. And I think that in retrospect, when you look back at that, you can say, where I am today, I am happy where I am today. I'm 61 years old. I've got 3 amazing adult kids that all have great marriages and relationships. I've got 4 amazing grandkids. I've got a wife that, we've been married for we're in our 36th year, and things are really good. So I look back at all the crap that I've gone through, the highs and the lows, and I say, hey, all of that were ingredients in the cocktail of life that brought me to where I am today. So I think that from a forward-looking perspective, I haven't gone through my last boatload of crap, right? There's still more coming. And I know what's on the other side of that, and I'm going to be okay. I think that if we can just look at when we're down in life, if we can just look at from an attitudinal perspective, the fact that this is not going to last forever. This too shall pass. It's going to be okay. We're going to learn from this. John Maxwell talks about wisdom. And a lot of people think wisdom comes with age. No, John says sometimes wisdom comes alone. Wisdom comes from not experience. It comes from evaluated experience. So how do we debrief a crappy sales call? How do we debrief a horrible experience in life? How do we debrief just crazy stuff like losing a home or a house burning down or something, having a wreck, losing a loved one? How do we debrief that stuff? How do we gain wisdom from that so that we come out better on the other end ultimately? And I think that it's just probably more metaphorical than anything, but I think it's also actual.
I wrote down a quote last night that is singing to the same tune. And it says, the amount of time after a bad thing happens that you return to baseline is the definition of resiliency. This was quoted by Alex Ramosi. And further, the context is something bad happens, whether you lose a loved one or I don't know, you lose a deal you thought was going to close, whatever that bad thing is, everyone experiences tough times. But it's like, how do you make that a V shape? Like, okay, you're down, then how do you bounce back? And what are some of the strategies and frameworks, Frank, that you've learned along the way that have increased not only your discipline muscle, but your resiliency muscle?
I think that being able to reframe a belief or an attitude, we have a belief, and this belief is going to inform our judgments. Our judgments are going to inform the way we act, and that way we act or behave is going to create an outcome. And that outcome will almost always reinforce our initial beliefs. How do we say, well, what if that wasn't true? What if cold calls did work? What if cold email did work? What would that look like? And it helps you reframe that and create a new judgment, act accordingly, and hopefully get a new or better output, and then reinforce that initial belief. And I think that, from a sales perspective, that's certainly important. And then also from a life perspective, just realizing, for me, my faith comes into that as well. Just knowing and understanding that this too shall pass. And I've read the end of the book and I know the way it's going to end, and it's going to be okay.
Spoiler alert for everyone listening. So at the end of the book, whether that's in 20 years, 40 years, who knows the technology, maybe 100 years, I don't know. But let's say at the end of the day, if you could talk to that person at the end of the day, and we talk about this off air, what would you say? Like, well, how would that conversation go?
Well, ultimately, the thing that I want to hear at the end is well done, good and faithful servant. Come on in, right? I want to hear that. If I needed to talk to myself at the end there, I would like to be able to tell myself, hey, that was a fun ride. You did a lot of really stupid things. You did some things that were really good, but look at this. Look at these grandkids. Look at the legacy you left behind. Look at the fact that they're going to be able to say, would they call me Baba? What would Baba have done in this situation? And I believe that they will say he would have always done the right thing, even if the right thing was a hard thing, and even if the right thing wasn't necessarily in his best interest. And that's what I want to instill. My kids have that to a degree. They're all in their 30s and they're working through that in one way or another, just like I did when I was younger. But I want them and my grandkids to have that as a legacy. So if I can look back at the end on my last day and I can see that my family is doing the right things, and that it's it's that. And it's from a professional perspective, Ross, I had a phone call with a lady who used to work for me 15 years ago, and she brought me to tears. She said to me, I learned so much from your leadership, from the way that you dealt with people, from the way that you dealt with things in the business. I learned so much from that short period of time that has helped me in my career. And she has gone on to do some meteoric stuff, and she's got a great marriage, and she's raised some amazing kids too. So I think that if I can look back and see stuff like that, Ross, I'm happy. I'm all good.
Yeah, it's such an important frame. You mentioned your faith, you mentioned your family, and then at the end, you didn't have that I want to be a millionaire by 30 goal that you had when you were a kid, but it was more, how do you impact the lives and really strengthen relationships with the people you worked with?
Yeah.
And I think if you measure success in those terms, one, it's more there's much more of an emotional tie, so it might be a stronger why. But two, you're likely going to hit your financial goals if you help enough people anyway.
Yeah.
So why not focus on the people?
Well, that's what Zig Ziglar said. He says,
right.
You can have anything in life that you want as long as you help enough other people get what they want.
How about it? Amen. And one thing that I want to absolutely give you a shout out for, and I just love to hear, I'll tell you a quick story. When I was in my PE days, feels like a long time ago, it wasn't that long ago, I got to meet a ton of people that had their MBAs and their CEOs of big companies and very successful, fortune-driven people that have just been there, and some of the sharpest. And you know what? Some of the things they told me, like, yeah, when I was your age, I was working 80 hours a week and I ignored my wife, and now we got divorced and I don't talk to my kid all that much. And like part of it was, I was like, if that's the price I have to pay to get to where you're at, I don't want to pay that price. Now, I'm not saying you have to pay that price, but in my frame of thinking at the time, I was like, I feel like I would have to pay the price. I don't. Not, once my daughter was born, I was like, no amount of money in the world, I'll figure it out. But I'm not going to be able to figure out having her not have a relationship with her, and not have my wife, who I love dearly, be like, hey, you don't pay attention to me because you're so busy working. So you mentioned one of your greatest accomplishments, and really you've been married longer than you've been leading B2B sales functions. That's pretty impressive. There is your marriage. What are some of the keys to marriage? What are some of the art and sciences for those who are listening, right? Because there's no such thing as a perfect marriage. You can't everything, but it's the ones that work, right? It's the commitment. It's the lasting power, which you've shown.
Man, I don't know if I know the keys to a happy marriage. It's been a lot of trial and error. My wife is definitely the better of the two of us at being married and having a relationship. I'm a hard-headed Swede and she's a hot-headed Italian, and we clash, and we've always clashed. I think that we've been willing to clash, and we made a commitment when we first got married. And I know we make a marriage commitment, but we also made a commitment to that both of us won't quit on the same day. I've quit, she's quit, but we've never quit on the same day. And I think that, just that tenacity and that stubbornness of not being willing to say I failed at marriage. And because I will not fail at marriage. I will do anything that I have to do, including marriage counseling. And we did a program in our church called Re-Engage. I mean, there's just been a lot of things that we've done to invest in our marriage. And I think we just see that there's more to life. There's more to it than just getting our own needs met. There's a greater good. There's our kids. There's our grandkids. There's more stuff out there to do together that we couldn't do if we just focused on our own needs and ended up it not working out, because that's not an option.
I love that frame of failure is not an option. And I think it's almost, I don't want to say more noble, but it's almost far more beneficial to fail in business than it would be to fail in marriage, in my perspective. Because businesses, I failed plenty of businesses. I'm married once. I never plan to get married again. Like, it's either death do you part, or whatever. I'm not willing to fail at love. Business, there's no such thing. I think that failing in business is table stakes to succeeding in business. I think that blowing a sales opportunity is table stakes to getting better at the next one. I think if someone told me today you have to get rejected 99 times in a row to hit a grand slam home run, I would fail as fast as possible in business.
Yeah. Well, Ross, you talk to on your show and in your world, you talk to a lot of EOS folks.
Yeah.
And that is an operating system for a business. I think you need to also have an operating system for your marriage. And I can't sit here and tell you, we have our level 10 meetings, and we've got our GWCs, and it's not to that degree, but I think that you kind of have to have a plumb line and a true north in your personal world, and you just don't violate those things. Just like every week you have a level 10 meeting, and here's the way we do that.
I totally agree, and I'm glad you pointed that out. I know several couples that run their family on EOS, and as much as I love EOS and I use it for my business and for clients, like as a framework, it's been super helpful. My wife, she's the type of salesperson that's like, oh, the process, I'm going to stick to what's worked and do it, her way. But the one thing,
she's a freelancer,
and she can do the process if she's forced, but it's not, she's so disciplined and stubborn and hardworking, and like just absolutely a dog on a bone when it comes to what she's committed to and interested in. And if the sales process is like we described earlier, where AI fills it in, she can just be a human and do the human thing, we'll crush, right? But the thing is that with the one-on-ones for EOS between the visionary and integrator, like the weekly same page meetings, you hit the nail on the head. I was thinking about this in my own marriage. It's like, if we skip a week where her and I don't have like an in-depth conversation about what's the last 7 days, what's the future 7 days, what do we have to do? Like, shit falls apart. Sorry for cursing, but like stuff, it's not healthy to go at least a week without having a deep dive. Like, and it could be 45 minutes. It doesn't be hours and hours. It could be just like, hey, here's what's on my mind. And it applies to business too, though, right? Because EOS does that between the visionary and integrator, the same page meeting. I'm glad you brought that up. So, Frank, I want to say, what are some of the ways that your faith, because you mentioned that being an integral part and like a serious commitment of yours, how has it helped? Not that it's like for the explicit purpose to help you in business, but what are some of the aspects of your spiritual life, your faith life, and how have they taught you how to be a better leader and sales leader?
Well, I believe so. I'm a big fan of John Maxwell, right? And John, he's written a gazillion leadership books. There you go. He's written a gazillion of them, and I remember listening to him live, talking about, he would get up on stage and he would talk for 90 minutes in front of a Fortune 100 company, and then the CEO would come up and interview him at the end and say, John, the stuff that you're giving us, we don't hear from anywhere else. He said, and this is revolutionary stuff. This is like, where do you get your information? Where do you get your stuff? And John would say, you don't really want to know. He's like, no, we want to know. We got to know. John, where do you get your, he's like, seriously, it's, and the guy talks to him and just say, hey, look, everything, all of my leadership principles came straight from the good book. They're biblically based, and I'm not going to sit here and tell you that everything that I do is biblically based, but I do have a true north in my life, and I believe that I need to treat people as I would like to be treated. And I think ultimately, if from a leadership perspective, look, I've been a really bad leader and I've been a really good leader. And I think that the times that I was a better leader, and hopefully that bad leadership piece is behind me now, is that it's just about understanding that the only thing we take off this planet with us is other people. And how do we leave them? How do we, I don't know. This is a good question, and it's tough to kind of put into words without getting, esoteric, but how do we lead them, in a way that builds them up, that adds value to them, that increases their value in the kingdom? How do we do that? And I think that those principles that I've taken from my faith have helped me along that path. Does that make sense?
Well, I'll tell you why it makes sense, and don't ever fear about going too esoteric with me, because I'll entertain it for sure. Two concepts when it comes to specifically to Christianity. So my background was in philosophy, and I got the real pleasure to live in the same dorm area, student housing, as friends that were in religious studies that wanted to get their doctorate of divinity, and that whole the theological route. And two things that a buddy of mine, Ethan Shear, I'll give him a shout out, taught me that I think really apply to what you said is the concept of sanctification, that it's like, human nature is human nature. Like there's only one perfect person that was on earth, and that was 2025 years ago. But our goal is to try and be more like that. And if the goal every day is to be, admit when you're wrong, try to do better, show up the next day, keep that process of cyclical improvement. Some people in Japanese philosophy call it Kaizen. I call it sanctification, here based in, Christian United States. Okay. Like there's that. And then there's the concept, and I don't know the label he said, but he basically said this was like a 2 a.m. patio night with cigars kind of thing. He said, sin as like a dirt, or as like, something that's on you, like call it clay. It's like, if you can get it washed off of you and you can, burn it down, it's probably going to be uncomfortable, right? But he's like, if you don't go through the process of, hygiene, or you don't go through the process of, working out, you don't go through the process of trying to do something to get your, I don't want to say clean, but to get yourself renewed, it's like, you're just going to, that's like the one sin that's kind of unforgivable. Like you gotta at least try to get it off. You gotta at least try to repent.
Yeah.
So I don't know what concept they are, but what you said made me think of those two stories from my buddy Ethan.
And I love that. Sanctification is a big piece of kind of what I do now. We've got a program called Regeneration, and it's a recovery program, and it's not just recovery from drugs and alcohol. It's recovery from just crap in life, right?
It could be anything.
And we talk about that whole sanctification thing. We are going to be in the process of sanctification, assuming that you've made a decision and you've been what we call reborn. And I know, look, there's going to be people that are going to turn off the podcast right now. But hey, and I respect their beliefs and their wishes, but it just in this specific context, sanctification is going to happen all the way up until the time that I take my last breath. And then I believe, these are my beliefs, that there's going to come a day when we're going to be taken up and given new bodies and have a new spiritual life. And that is going to be perfection. Sanctification process will be done by then. So in the meantime, we're going to do everything we can to sanctify our sales process and get better and learn from it on a daily basis.
That's the thing. I totally agree with you. Like, just because that's what you believe and I share what I believe, like whatever other people believe, whatever that is, like, so long as that we can work together and treat each other with respect and dignity and kindness is not niceness, by the way. But as long as we can treat each other in a certain way and just go towards the mission, like those are like, we're sharing our core values. And I think a lot of the art of sales, and my guess is like, how do we just connect with people and on a values level and like help them? One of the best sales leaders, I know I'm going on a tangent, so forgive me. Chris DeMeo, shout out to him, one of the best sales leaders I ever got to work with. He goes, look, Ross, the reason you suck at sales right now is because you think that you have to try and get them to sign on a dotted line. Your goal is to help people. Your goal is to help people. And if what you're selling helps people, then go and sell it. Because by not selling, you're not helping people. You're not doing your job.
And you've got to be willing to suck until you get better.
Yeah.
Because if you're not willing to suck, you're not going to pick up the phone. You're not going to reach out. You're not going to have the conversations. You're not going to go through the motions that you need to go through to get better.
Can you share any stories of when you quote unquote stunk at sales and like what like any instances? Because I have one that I can, plenty, but I have one that I can share where you're like, okay, that was bad.
Let me hear yours.
All right. So I spent a lot of time in the sales team, more on like the client success, account management, but then I would also help close new business. And there was one prospect that I was like, okay, I'm going to show the boss, I'm going to show the sales guys how good of an expert I am. And I just kept talking about I was like explaining technical stuff, all the ways that were great and we're going to help. And at the end, the car ride back from the prospect meeting, the guy goes, you blew it. I'm like, what do you mean? I thought I crushed it. And he goes, he's like, how many questions did you ask? You didn't ask any questions. You just talked at them. Like their eyes just glazed over. Like they didn't care or know what you're talking about. It's like, that was a missed opportunity, brother. Like you really stink. And I just like sat there in silence, like, holy shit, I didn't ask any questions. Anyway.
I think that's super easy. We call that happy years. You get happy years and then you just kind of, you forsake the process and you just kind of go for the close. And that almost never works. I think that probably my biggest problem in sales had always been was, I was confident. And when I heard buying signals, I would just go for the close. And then, when I got pushback, instead of asking questions, I would put pressure on prospects. And I think that was probably something that I sucked at I sucked at it pretty well. And the quintessential young, high D, in your grill, ego-based sales thing that ever happened to me was, this was 27 years ago, something like that. I had a client that wasn't paying their invoice, and the owner of the company picked up the phone and called his boss. And then this guy picked up the phone and started railing on me about, how dare you go around me. I'm like, the dude owns the company. He's got the right to pick up the phone and try to collect his accounts receivable. And the guy started cussing me out. I got real humid right there. I got real Marine Corps, and I told the guy that if I could crawl through this phone, I would crawl through this phone and kick his ass right there in his own office if I could. And then I slammed down the phone. And the guy just got my goat, man. I've learned to hide my goat a little better, but the guy got my goat. And this was a long, long time ago, but the experience is still here, and I evaluated it, and I gained wisdom, and I don't get that emotional with people anymore.
But it's a skill, right? Like, it's a skill. Like, you said, hiding your goat could be equated to like toughness, right? It's easy to quantify the skill development of toughness in the Marines because you're getting people screaming at you to do the thing that you need to do, and if you don't do it, the consequences, the lashings continue until morale improves, kind of thing. But in business, when you're outside of that and you're just like on a phone, you almost have to have, like, how do you get wisdom? Well, you have to reflect on the error of your ways. How do you get patience? Well, you have to learn how to get delayed gratification, how to get toughness. You have to experience pain and realize you can't let it hurt that bad next time. Yeah. I love that story. It probably stunk at the moment, but it's great to have a chuckle.
It actually felt really good until I realized, that's probably not the way to do things.
That's funny. Frank, I'm going to spring a surprise on you, but you're ready for it. If you've seen any recent episodes, you'll see that I have leave a question, ask a question. So the last guest I had on has a question for you, not knowing who you were, and then you'll get to ask a question for the next guest. Would you like to ask your question first, or would you like to answer the question first? I'm breaking my sales process.
One of the things that I'm rolling out a kind of something that's not so much Sandler. Sandler's going to be certainly involved in it, but a fractional sales leadership piece. And I think that, working with founders that are frustrated and they're holding the bag and they're trying to scale their business and they can't do it while they're holding the bag. They need to go work on their business instead of in it. And I guess my question for that entrepreneur is, have you given up? What are you going to do about this? Do you want some help?
Is that specifically to holding on to the sales seat?
It's specifically, that's part of it. But how the heck are you going to scale your business while you're doing that? And you know what? Most of them will say, I got this. It's going to be fine. Everything's going to be great. And then it's not.
Now, that's an interesting question. I kind of phrase it as, how the heck are you going to scale your business while you're in the weeds of your business?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thanks for rephrasing my question. I like the way you put it better.
Well, I love how you asked it, and I'll ask the other parts as like context, because usually you have to give more context. I find, the more I talk to people and the more I have these conversations, the less I believe in coincidence, right? I feel like each question, the randomness thing isn't so random after all. This goes back to the Frank that was sitting in the guidance counselor's office that, was like, the heck with this. I'm not going back to school. This isn't for me. If you go back and talk to yourself, then what would be a personal piece of advice you've given to that younger version and a professional piece of advice?
You say personal or professional?
Both. One of each.
If I was talking to that kid there, I probably would have said, personal, I would have said, hey, look, the you're going to want to get married. Wait, because I had one of those early on from a personal perspective. From a professional perspective, I would have said, you've had some great mentors in life. Seek out some professional mentors and get in their hip pocket and do the things that those folks did to make them successful.
Success leaves clues. There you go. Yeah. There's a clue.
Yeah.
Frank, absolute pleasure talking with you today. Where can people find you? Where can people connect?
Man, the best place is LinkedIn. Frank Gustafson on LinkedIn is kind of my home. I'm on all the other socials, but not nearly as much as LinkedIn. I spend most of my time on LinkedIn. Very cool. Everyone listening, thanks for tuning in. As you know, I don't run ads in the show. My only ask is if you could share this with a friend. If they found value, they might enjoy it. It's the only way the show grows.
Everyone, be well. Thank you, Frank.